thrilled to be here, and we're going to talk for the next 25 or so minutes about corporate responsibility in the sense of scaling big, scaling quickly. Given the elephant in the room, the current political environment, what used to be in corporate responsibility speak slow, patient change has sped up. And we now see businesses actually empowered to dip their toes ever so slightly into the world of social impact. What used to be very dangerous for companies, we're finally seeing them come forward. So that will be somewhat of the frame for our discussion today. But before I continue on, I would love to introduce right to my right, we have Patsy Door, who is with Thomson Reuters, big data media company. Cecily Joseph, who heads up corporate responsibility with Symantec, right down the street, sort of. And Suzanne Fallender, who is with Intel. And before I start asking them questions, I wanted them to give you just a little bit of brief background on their work, and then we'll carry on. So why don't I start with Patsy?
Sure, happy to. So delighted to be here. Hello to everybody. I can sort of see you, most of you in the crowd. So my name is Patsy Door. I run 3 areas at Thomson Reuters globally. I run corporate social responsibility, sustainability, and diversity and inclusion. We combined those 3 areas under one umbrella, so basically social impact and ESG, about 3.5 years ago. I joined 5 years ago, coming from many years in investment banking, actually, in talent development and organizational behavior. So I've had the pleasure of living all over the world, including New York, London, Hong Kong, and a variety of other different cities. I'm based in New York, like many of us, spending a lot of time on airplanes. But our work is really, as Susan mentioned, really critical these days, and we'll get into it a bit more as we move on. But for Thomson Reuters, for those of you that don't know the company that well, you probably know our news organization. At the end of the day, we're a data company. We're 50,000 employees strong, 100 countries, 590 cities, 12 billion in revenue. And our basic product is really around data, information management, and news. So glad to be here and look forward to the conversation.
It's about as tech as you get.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cecily.
Great. Hi. Great to be here. So, Cecily Joseph, I work with Symantec Corporation. Symantec is the largest cybersecurity company in the world. And my work there is around corporate responsibility, which includes our environmental programs, also overseeing all of our social programs, our foundation, all of our philanthropy. And I've served as the Chief Diversity Officer for the past 3 years. The other program that I manage is a signature program that we have that's focused on bringing young adults into the cybersecurity profession. If you think about IT, there's a lack of, we have a shortage of qualified people to take a lot of the IT jobs that are coming around. You can only imagine how scarce it is in cybersecurity. So they estimate by 2025 there'll be about 1.5 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs. So we work to try to create programs where we are training underrepresented young adults and women in cyber, rapid training, getting them into internships and then into jobs. And so that's one of my favorite programs that I'm kind of working on right now.
Suzanne.
Sure. So my name is Suzanne Fallender. I'm the Director of Corporate Responsibility at Intel. Intel has been working on corporate responsibility issues for many years. Actually, one of the first companies to publish a voluntary environmental report back in 1994. One of the first companies to really have a stakeholder engagement outreach approach. But what's been most interesting to me about the time I've been at Intel, which is about 10 years now, is that it's really evolved over time and become much more integrated across the company. So when we look at our approach to corporate responsibility, it's always been about looking at the benefit to society, but also the benefit to the company, and really framing it with data and the business case for why this is important to be committed and investing long term. Our 4 key areas where I work with teams really embedded in our manufacturing group, in our HR group, in different parts of the company, increasingly in new business areas as Intel's business evolves, in teams working on artificial intelligence, autonomous driving, drone technology, is in the areas of environmental responsibility, supply chain responsibility, diversity inclusion, and social impact. And so I'll get into some of these programs and also how each of those areas has really evolved over the last 2 decades.
Yeah. And it's interesting, what used to be back in '94 and even in the early 2000s a nice to have, corporate responsibility, sustainability, corporate philanthropy, now is very much a must have, and not just at the big, large corporations, but even mid-size and to some extent small companies. Question, how have things evolved over the last 6 months or 8 months since the change in Washington at your companies?
Well, I think it goes even more past the last 6 months. I think what we've seen is this general change in expectations for companies that's been building among investors, among customers, among employees in terms of how authentic and engaged companies are on these issues. And also, when you look at important issues like climate change and diversity and inclusion, whether companies are willing to put policies in place or stand up and talk about the importance of of those issues. And so I think that's just been,
Sure.
and that's maybe accelerated more in the last 6 months, but it's been building over time.
And I would agree with that, absolutely. I mean, I think it's an imperative, as you said, Susan, there's no doubt. We talk about these issues as a business. I run a business for the company. At the end of the day, we need to do this because, as you mentioned, our talent expects it. The millennials expect this, right? And not just the millennials, but certainly a big proportion.
Yep.
Our customers expect it. They're asking questions about it in RFPs. We go out and meet with our customers on a regular basis to talk about how we're approaching these issues. And to your point, what I found particularly fascinating, and maybe it's because I come from the financial services community, but the rise of the investor and the importance role that investors are playing in this space. I'll give you a statistic that I use a lot because I find it astounding, that 70% of all assets under management, approximately 65 trillion US dollars, will be in the hands of millennials and women in the next 8 to 10 years. So can you imagine the impact that's going to have on the role of the private sector, but also on financial services and the communities at large? Wow. So we really have to pay attention to those factors because, fortunately or unfortunately, trends follow the money.
Yes.
And that's a pretty large sum that we're talking about there.
And money speaks louder than words.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The other thing I would add is that I think there's continues to be a growing expectation that companies, when they have their corporate responsibility programs, are looking for more and more ways to align that with the business.
Yes.
So when you look at, investors and other stakeholders, gone are the days of, oh, that's great, you have a volunteer program where people are just doing whatever in the corner, or you're investing in a nonprofit that's not connected to the work you do. I think there's very much an expectation that the work you do in the area of CSR is aligned to the work that you do as a company, and that it's bringing back benefit to the company as well.
And helping you hire the best people,
That's
helping
right.
those people stay at your company and not detract. I mean, finding and keeping valuable, smart people is very, very difficult. So, did you want to add to anything to that?
Yeah, I think within those pieces, I think there's also been this concept of, especially for companies that are new to this and starting out, where do you start and thinking about how to build your strategy? A lot of bigger companies have started more in the philanthropy space and then needed to move into this more shared value model. I think what we're seeing now is as companies start, they're really starting from that premise of what is the purpose of my business, what are the core assets, what is the expertise, or what do I bring to issues, and then how do they find the right partners in the ecosystem to contribute, rather than doing things just on your own. I think most large companies will have now we say a portfolio of ways that they're driving social impact that include philanthropy as a key part of that, but then also have the range of other programs.
It's excellent. I feel like Lily Tomlin because my feet don't hit the ground here, so I'm going to, you see me adjusting in the seat quite a bit, that is why. But on to the next question. We know employees and consumers increasingly are seeking to work and patronize companies that they feel are going beyond in terms of purpose. How are you involving your employees in this whole notion of employee engagement? And can you give some examples of how you are innovating in this way?
Sure.
So volunteering definitely continues to be really important for our employees. And I think one of the things that we've been very successful with lately that that I'm really delighted to see is this idea of virtual volunteering. So a lot of times, even though we've implemented programs at Symantec where employees can take up to so many days a year off to volunteer during work time, and we bring on-site activities, we still have a great percentage of employees that feel that they just cannot leave their work desk to go and volunteer. So we brought the volunteering to them. And so they're great partners. One that I think of is called Career Village, where you can go online and you can actually mentor and answer students' questions, K through 12, and give them advice on your career and things like that. It takes a few minutes out of your day, but it is so impactful. And so the virtual volunteering is definitely something that I see picking up and that I'm really excited about.
And that's using technology.
Using technology.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
I think I would add from our perspective too. I mean, so when we think about social impact, we think about the three areas that, in our case, CSR, sustainability, and diversity. Very much like my esteemed panelist colleagues here. We're driving it from two different angles. One is external in terms of driving thought leadership and data around these topics, so getting back to ESG data as the underlying principle. But the other piece is internal. So we really want to engage our employees in all these aspects. So similarly to Symantec, we have a lot of different volunteering programs. And getting back to your comment, I think, which is really important about the link back to the business, is we're focusing now more on skills-based volunteering. So it's more about really utilizing those skills you have in the organization and applying them in a very constructive, strategic way to the communities we operate in. I think from the diversity and inclusion perspective, getting people involved in business resource groups. The conversation around that has changed as well. It's not just about affinity anymore, which is very important, but it's also about driving business. So if you're in the women at Thomson Reuters, for example, part of your role is to help recruit people to come into our organization and to bring more clients into the organization as well. So those are a couple different examples of how we look across that space. From a sustainability perspective, we've got some really aggressive targets in place with our climate and our environment. We're looking for a zero carbon footprint in the next 5 years, and you can imagine in a company that has 590 locations, this is quite an undertaking, but we've got massive support from the top to do that, and it's really important to us to do that as well as we talk about what we want to do from a brand perspective to attract talent.
Amazing. Yeah. 490 locations?
590.
500. Oh my God.
And coming down for that reason.
Suzanne, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, sure. On the environmental side, a couple things that have been, I think, pretty interesting over time. One has been leveraging our internal telepresence rooms to do sustainability speaker series. This actually started by one of our employees. He had an idea, hey, I could do this on a monthly basis. And so that's been a really easy lift that a lot of other companies have been able to kind of take that and also replicate that in their organizations. We also have something called the Environmental Excellence Awards. And when you think about Intel, we're a major manufacturer, and we have a lot of technical engineers across the company. And so what we've done is we put this annual process in place to recognize teams of employees who have done pretty technical projects to help save water, energy, waste reduction across the company. And then what we do is we also look not just at the environmental benefit, but we're able to quantify the financial savings as a result in many cases. And so what we do is we then share that information back with employees to show here with the cumulative environmental benefits and then also the financial savings. And one other thing that we've done in that regard is we've actually linked a portion of every employee and executive's pay to sustainability and CSR factors since 2008. And so that also has helped to raise awareness that this is really important. And it changes every year what we link. This past 2 years we've done it really to our diversity goals, but we've done it with our climate goals, our waste reduction goals, our recycling goals. And then similarly on that skills-based volunteering, we have this program called the Intel Employee Service Corps, where we're able to send teams of employees to support projects around the world where we're basically installing technology working with a local school or a nonprofit. And it's a very popular program. And from an HR perspective, it's one of our most popular employee programs, and we get so many more applications than we can sometimes fill. But it really, people do want to help with the programs that we're investing in around the world.
Amazing. Thank you. Pivoting, and you mentioned HR, diversity and inclusion for many, many years was the purview of HR. And it is somewhat, I mean, it's still very much managed, worked into HR's function, but corporate responsibility is now very much involved. And I know each of you are doing programs to help kind of break that divide open. Why don't we start with you, Suzanne, on some of the work that you're doing?
I think when we think about our diversity and inclusion programs, we have for many years had a core on improving the diversity and inclusion in our own workforce, but in the last few years we've also expanded that out to our supply chain, to the broader ecosystem, and through our social impact programs and really tightly align those. I think one of the things that's always been helpful to us is setting a bold goal, and so we had, in 2015, our CEO set a goal to achieve full representation in our workforce by 2020, and then really put the resources behind that to drive change within our own company and within the industry. So things like increasing our supplier spends with diverse-owned businesses. Our Intel Capital Group actually started an Intel Capital Diversity Fund, and then we just recently launched a program called Intel Innovation Generation, which is really focused on getting underserved youth the new technology and emerging technology skills they'll need for employability and future outcomes. So it's about thinking about these things not just as one diversity goal, but thinking about it, how all these things play together. Because if you just set a goal, we're going to hire this many people, you're not looking about retention, you're not looking at progression, you're not looking at your culture, you're not looking about what you're putting through the rest of your ecosystem. So, and it does take a lot. And we've found by talking to our suppliers, by talking to others in the industry, we've learned a lot, and we can continue to kind of reassess and fine-tune our strategies as we go.
Well, it allows you to cast a much wider net as well.
Absolutely.
So if you put it out there and you acknowledge. Cecily, do you want to?
Yeah, so I think of it a similar way. I think of kind of 4 parts to diversity inclusion from a company perspective. There's your traditional talent. So what are you doing around acquiring talent, developing talent, retaining talent in your company? And that's what we tend to most often think about when we think about diversity. There's also the culture piece, right? So this is this idea of building a culture where everybody feels they belong, the inclusive piece. I mean, we often talk about the fact that what does it matter if you bring in all this diverse talent if you can't get them to stay at the company? So that's often a challenge, and so that's where like the business affinity groups or ERGs or the different names come into play and are really critical too. And then there's this idea of value chain, right? So what are we doing beyond what we're doing for our talent inside the company, but what are we doing through our value chain? What are we doing in our local communities to increase the pipeline, to build more diversity into the future workforce? What are we doing in our supply chain? What are we doing in marketing? What are we doing in the way that the images that we're using in our marketing efforts, et cetera? And then finally, a piece that I think companies struggle with, because I think there's always this idea of, well, what's my role as a corporation in this? But there's this whole idea of thought leadership and partnership beyond what we're doing for our own company and even in our own value chain. But what are we doing for broader society? What are we doing as far as the public policy initiatives that we belong to, the leadership that our CEOs are, speaking. Our CEO of Intel today just came out with a really strong statement today around diversity and building more equitable, our equitable society. So what are the things that we should be doing from an external perspective and using the company's reputation and force and strength to drive forward?
An amplification. I mean, that's the other thing. When companies of your size and stature get up and talk about the importance of this, people notice.
That's right.
Absolutely.
And I know it's even in your title.
Yes, it is. It actually makes me bothered when people look at diversity as an HR issue, because it's absolutely not. And when we first started down this path now 5.5 years ago, we had a lot of different pockets of activity with the business resource groups, the employee resource groups, and things of that nature, and in certain regions around the globe. But we didn't have a global, strategic, coordinated approach. And so I tell you that because when we started down this path, it was very important to myself, to our CEO, and to the other members of our leadership team that this was a business imperative. And I know that sounds corny, and we all hear this word all the time, but we really mean it. At the end of the day, we define diversity as diversity of thought, style, experience, and approach. That's really what it's about. And to your point, Susan, it's about casting the widest net to get the best talent into the organization because we're a business. We want to increase engagement, we want to increase productivity, we want to increase innovation and the bottom line. And we know for a fact, based on the research that's out there today, that diversity actually drives those factors. So what I've found particularly fascinating over the past couple years are 2 things. Number one, the way the conversation has changed. I remember sitting in a chair like this kind of 5.5 years ago, and the whole conversation was about prove the business case to me, show us the research. Nobody cares anymore, because we know the research is there, right? We just need the answers. How do we actually address this stuff? Do it as large companies, do it together as large companies working collectively. So I think that's pretty exciting. We too just put in a goal, which we were very excited about, 40% women in leadership by 2020. Again, aggressive goal, but we're going to do it. That's the plan.
That's great.
Yeah, this is hot off the press, by the way. This is about 2 months old, so we're pretty excited about it. And then I'll add one more comment. I don't want to take up the whole panel here, but I think the other thing that's really exciting about diversity, but also the broader CSR portfolio and sustainability portfolio that we all work in, is again getting back to the whole concept of data and how that drives innovation. And, for us, we're a company that has a massive ESG database. We leverage that database.
Can you explain what ESG is?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So it's, I use that word a lot, so you have to sort of explain it. It's a good point.
This isn't a CSR audience.
That's true. So ESG is environmental, social, and governance data. So if you think about environmental data, it's primarily about our environment, our relationship with our environment, climate change, things of that nature. Social is really about how we interact in the communities that we work in, so environmental, social data. Governance data is primarily about management structure within an organization, executive compensation, and news and controversy. So that's really what ESG is about. And what we're finding today in this space, and I think this is heavily linked to technology. I mean, we're a technology company at our heart. 50% of our employees are technologists, right? Is that this is the underpinning to all of those three areas. If you can actually access, curate that data, and present it in a way that makes sense internally and externally, you can continue to drive that business case and come up with those types of solutions that make sense both for your organization and for others. Mm-hmm. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I always wanted, I'm reticent on using
acronyms.
Abbreviations. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So last question, and then everybody can go to lunch, because it's never good to be the last presenters before people are hungry or before the cocktails. But if you were going to offer advice to someone who is running a business and they want to create or develop a corporate responsibility program, can you offer some wisdom or guidelines on some of the quick things that they can do right at the start?
Well, I think it's really important to upfront establish some key priorities. There are so many things that all of us would like to do or could do in the area of corporate responsibility, sustainability, diversity, citizenship, CSR, whatever the name. You can pick the name, what you want to call it. And then, but I think it's really important to establish priorities, and I would do that by creating a cross-functional team. So I would bring together different stakeholders from across your organization. People who show passion, people who are in leadership, and then I would bring some outside voices in, and I would hone in on those 3 or 4 focus areas that you feel as a business you can impact or that are somehow an issue that you could help address with the work that you're doing on the CSR side. I think starting there and being very focused in a specific area and really showing change over time is sort of really the best way to sort of drive the program forward and to build something that's brand new.
And just building on that, I think also don't worry about getting it perfect at the beginning, right? So I think start with a few
or even
places,
later,
or trying to go 0 to 60 too fast. I find some people who kind of reach out to me and to you about, hey, I just got given this role within my company and I have 60 days to figure out the strategy. I think you get it as good as you can, and then it's going to evolve, just like all of our programs have evolved over time. And I think that outside voices is really important too. A lot of people get, I think, tripped up by saying, I've got to do so much data and research, and they keep in that loop. But I think even if you started with having some employee focus groups or having, talk with your largest customers or talk with a few neighborhood, organizations, really just try to get that initial sense, and then you can build from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would agree with everything that was just said, but just add to that a couple of things. I mean, I think it gets back to the business case. So start with a strong business case. Bring on board top leadership. Again, these things are much easier said than done. Obviously, they sound rather trite, but this is hard work, right? Get that business case together, engage your leadership team, engage your employees, and I would just reiterate the value of the collective. So, for example, one very tangible example, we were talking about it earlier, we signed on to the UN Global Compact. That's, a couple thousand gigantic global corporations who are collectively committing to these goals.
Yeah.
And so to actually work in partnership with your customers, with your competitors on these issues, and to really, again, get back to the business case being both brand value and competitive advantage, I think that really helps set up a good starting point for success.
Yeah. Well, in closing, I want to just bring up a bit about what I mentioned earlier about businesses actually stepping into this area of social and true social impact in the sense of what's happening in society today. And Silicon Valley companies, a great many of them, were heavily behind pushing for marriage equality long before the rest of the United States got on the bandwagon, so to speak, other than Delta, Dow Chemical, Disney, some others. But, Google, Microsoft, and many other companies really pushed hard, and I credit for that to being one of the reasons it passed as quickly as it did. And in the last year, we've seen businesses come out against the immigration ban and against some other things. So I would love just if any of you wanted to add some fodder, maybe not representing your company, but maybe just what you're seeing in that area.
I think on some of these issues, especially with climate change for one, I think you really do see how this has shifted. And I think even when you're talking about ESG, before Intel, I actually worked in a socially responsible investing research firm when really the only people looking at these were socially responsible investors. And now you have a much broader definition of who's looking at this. And what really struck me is when a lot of the activity happened in the May, June timeframe is that it were mainstream businesses, large investors, mayors of cities coming out and acknowledging that there was a business case for this, we had to take action, and I think that just shows how things have shifted. Now people come at it very differently, people are kind of looking at how quickly, how fast action is required, but I do think you have a very different discussion on a lot of these issues than you had even 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, and I think that's what's empowering companies to stand up and be braver. It's the collective action, right?
Yes.
Absolutely.
It's being a part of something bigger than yourself. It's not one company going out there and doing that, but it's a group of companies coming together, right? And making that happen together. And I think that's the difference we're seeing now.
Yes.
That we probably didn't see before, and why some of this is happening.
And I would just add quickly, in the interest of time, because we see the big light blinking here, is that I think what's also changed is that these topics are now integrated into the business discussion.
Yes.
Right? It's no longer, to your point earlier, we're not speaking to a group of practitioners with all due respect. And I'm finding more over time, we're speaking to different business people, to investors, to technologists like yourselves and others who have an interest in these topics because they're part of how we wish to do business.
Yes.
And so that integration, I think, lends so much more value to these topics, and I'm hopeful that that will allow us to make more progress over time.
And it also makes the workplace a heck of a lot more interesting and exciting, too.
Absolutely.
Well, with that, thank you, Suzanne, Cicely, and Patsy, and thank you all for waiting until now to go have lunch. Thank you.